Hi, and welcome to the NCSFA webinar, Redefining the Fleet Role. The roles of fleets and how fleets conduct business are constantly changing. Vehicles, technology, motor pools, and shops are just a few of many changes fleet professionals need to keep current with. This session will take a closer look into these areas of your fleet and how not to get stuck in the past, but move forward toward the future of fleet. Key takeaways include learning how to calculate the ROI on electric vehicles, how to best dispose of vehicles at the end of their life cycle, and are your technicians ready for the shop of the future? Our speakers include Mark Canton, Senior Manager for Data Analytics at Mercury Associates Incorporated, Tony Johnson, Executive Fleet Director at the University of Alabama, and Kathy Wellick, Director of Fleet at Iowa State University. She also chairs the NCSFA Programs Committee. You want to take it away, Kathy?
Yes, thank you very much, Lauren, and thank you, everybody. Welcome. If you want to go ahead to the next slide, please, Lauren. It's my privilege and honor to speak with all of you today and to be on this panel with Mark and Tony. We're going to talk a little bit about the fleet in the past, the present, and the future. You want to go ahead and move forward? Thank you. And one more time. Thank you. So vehicles of the past. I had a customer a couple of years ago that invited my husband and I to their house, of him and his wife, and this was the kind of car that he had. And he went and took us out for a drive and then told me I had to drive it back. This is one that takes two hands to drive the car and so forth. So cars have evolved and changed, and fleet has evolved and changed. And just think we're going from this, and then Tony's going to take us through the present, and Mark is going to take us to the future. So walk down memory lane. What was your first car? Go ahead and put it in the chat box. We're going to go down memory lane a little bit. I know mine was a silver Chevy Impala. It wasn't this vehicle, obviously, but it was very close. I was so thankful to have one because it was Grandma and Grandpa's, and if they hadn't have passed it on, I probably wouldn't have had one. But turning 16 and being a driver and so forth was the thing to do back then. Nowadays, my daughter's friends, they don't even go get their license because of how fleet has changed. So yeah, it looks like a lot of good answers there. Toyota Tercel, Thunderbird, Bronco, all that good stuff. Mercury Cougar. So yeah, a little trip down memory lane there for us. Next slide, please. So we're going to focus on a couple different areas like we had talked about. And the first area we're going to discuss is vehicles. So our past vehicles. They were bigger. They were definitely not as fuel efficient. Most drivers were assigned their own vehicle. So if it was a police officer, they would take their vehicle home. This was their car. This is what they had, and they weren't sharing vehicles. There definitely were not as many electronics on the vehicles as there is today. They were sturdy and solid. So if you maybe hit their bumper, it didn't make a dent. Whereas nowadays, with all the electronics, if you hit a bumper, it could cost you thousands of dollars. And there was less safety equipment. So our drivers did have, more risk safety-wise. Next, motor pools. So I know our motor pool has come a long way in the past 15 years. We literally, if you can go to the next screen, please, went from manual paperwork and manual trip tickets and keys to reimbursing fuel and so forth. Before we had fuel cards that we could share in vehicles. Now you've got all kinds of different technology. It's even hard to find a regular key like this anymore. Most everything is fobs these days. So more manual paperwork, and the more times that paperwork is transferred by humans into different systems, the greater the chance of error. Past shops. You probably went to the same garage every time, and you probably had the same mechanic every time. You knew the mechanic by name. It was full service shop. I remember the DX man, Henry Thorsbachen, teaching me how to wash windows properly. And back then you could even put it on your bill and they'd send you a bill once a month. Times have changed. For those of you that know Butch, which many of you do, that is the original Butch's over on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, that is actually the station where I used to get my 1970 Impala worked on. All right, next. And then disposal. In the past, and one more screen, please. Most disposals were live auctions or employee sales. You might have traded in the vehicle when you went to buy a new one. A lot of people had to send into surplus. And there used to be a day, I don't know, I'm from a small town, but we used to have that swimming pool parking lot that would always have 2 or 3 vehicles with a for sale sign in it as you go through the main drag of town, because that's how you sold vehicles. You didn't have computers and so forth to sell them online. So disposal was also very different at that time. Next. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tony, and Tony's going to talk about today's vehicles, what it's like in the present, and he's also going to give us a case study that they've done at the University of Alabama that I know you'll be able to take some nuggets home with you too in evaluating and helping you with your fleet. So Tony, go ahead.
Thank you, Kathy. One is I'd just like to thank Kathy and Lauren and Mark. They have got a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate our relationship here recently and getting some insight from them. So I really appreciate y'all. As everyone knows, our present vehicles are made of sedans and coupes, convertibles, micro cars. There's some sports utility vehicle, commercial vehicles. I know here on campus at Alabama, we got garbage trucks, bucket trucks, dump trucks, stuff like that. There may be some hatchbacks, some vans, minivans, cargo vans, trucks, super cabs, regular cabs, and they may go from 150s to 450s, 550s, whatever you may have. And then you got your motor pool is on your motor pools. There's many of our motor pools that has a fleet from various sizes. We use vehicles that's got gas. They may use diesel. Some of them may be hybrid, and some of them may be even electric. So, and then our motor pools have actually changed, over the years to where we got secure key cabinets that houses all of our fleet keys. Key cabinets, you have the possibility to automate and hand over the key process, which is pretty seamless. The key cabinets, reliable solutions for management vehicles to manage the keys, keeps things moving, and items are returned back. And you can also look at the websites for booking and allocation of vehicles. So you can also, the key cabinets protect from the theft and unauthorized use of vehicles. So, we got the app now, so we got the web, so we can check out many things. So the key cabinets can be used you can use a PIN, or you may use an RFID card or some other type of card that's within your organization to get those vehicles. So at any time, so it's 24/7. And then fueling options. You got the possibility to have your own fueling stations, so where you can control the fuel and amount of fuel that's coming in and out. You may have a markup. You can add fuel additives if need be, if you're having issues in your shops with the fuel injectors being clogged or just different types of gas. And then you also have your gas cards, and there's many of them that's out there. And then present automotive shops, you can be the small ones that only has a couple of lifts, and they do small things and maybe less than 1,000 square feet, and some of them may be over 10,000 square feet. You can go anywhere from doing just PMs to complex repairs. But, as always, our top objectives are safety and customer service, having a good work environment, and keeping the area neat, clean, and organized, which you see in these shops here, which at Alabama, we refer to that as NCO, keeping our facilities NCO. Now, in our case study, one thing that we've done, our fleet management program has been available since January 2020. And when we started that, we knew we had all these vehicles that we was going to be getting rid of and starting our new program. Well, with that, we needed to auction off some vehicles. We used an outside vendor, and it served its purpose for quite a few years. We sold other items besides vehicles on there. It might be furniture and other items. Our vehicles would average, I think we got about $200,000 a year. So, and our current, our previous auction site was through another vendor. It was online, which was good. 12.5% buyer's fee. So if you was a potential customer, you knew what the maximum was that you was going to. You can back up, Lauren. But you knew how much you was going to pay for a vehicle. So if $5,000 is all you was going to pay, well, you had to factor in that 12.5% buyer's fee. So, and we knew that that was an issue that we wanted to kind of make sure that we got the most money that we possibly could. We really, the outside service was really good, the online service. So they gave us good reports. They gave us really good feedback. But one of the complaints that we had was from our customers, they did not enjoy that buyer's fee. So if they bid $5,000, that's all they wanted to pay. They didn't want to pay any more. So next slide. So these are the things that we knew. So we knew we'd be eliminating more and selling more vehicles due to the development of fleet management. And as the year went on, the pandemic started impacting our vehicles and how they were being driven and used around campus. So we just wanted a site where people would just go to on selling just vehicles. We knew that if we did it in-house, we had more opportunity to get higher dollars. We could also target markets through certain advertising campaigns to get more money for our vehicles. And, you know, and also we wanted to bring in as much as what we possibly could, and we wanted as much control of the site as what we could. So what we did was went out and researched, and we developed our own website. So, and the website that we went to, you can go to the next one. And also, before I get to that, is as you all know about the vehicle shortages due to the pandemic that's going on currently, has been going on for a while. The chip shortage, the supply and the demand is high, and the supply is low. And then our older vehicles we identified and determined through our sales, they actually went up. So the vehicle demands and resales of our current old vehicles went up in the market. So the next slide, Laura. So this is what we came up with. So we went with Woo Auction Pro for Business. It's $119 a year. That's all that we pay. We got control of the site. We do not take credit cards. We take a certified cashier's check whenever someone wins. So this is the cost of the site. It's $119 annually. We charge no buyer's fee. So if you win the winning bid, that's what you pay. And our customers have really enjoy that. So this is our site. So when you go in, you have to create your own users and user ID. And then you also have to agree to our terms and conditions, and it comes back in a DocuSign back to us. So we've got everybody user ID and where they've agreed to our terms. You know, such things as is, where is, and stuff like that. So next slide. This is what our auction site looks like. These are some of the closed auctions. You can put multiple pictures on the vehicles, inside, out, 4 or 5 angles, whatever you want to do. And you put your starting price on there. So in the state of Alabama, we have to list the vehicles for at least 14 days. So some state agencies, processes and laws may be a little bit different. I know that there's some live auctions where you can have those. You can some areas can actually put a price tag on the vehicle and sell it for that, but we can't. We've got to advertise it and open it up for any and everyone, and it's got to be advertised for 14 days. And then the next slide, same thing here. You can see what some of the winning bids and stuff were. So that we've had on some of our vehicles. Some of them looks really good. Some of them does not. So we sell all kinds of items. All right, auction summary. We started this, our live date was July the 13th. Since then, we have sold 176 total items, mainly vehicles, but we have sold truck beds and bumpers and toolboxes and tires and wheels and rims. So we have sold a little bit of everything. We have sold 157 vehicles, and then we've eliminated 119 vehicles from our fleet. We actually had almost 890 vehicles, and we're down to 770 vehicles or so at the moment. What have we generated in revenue was $860,000 in almost a year's time. And if you remember what I said earlier from the previous site that we had, we was doing about $200,000. So some of you may be on this same program, and you can relate your numbers back to ours. But if you just take that 860,000 and multiply by that 12.5%, you're looking at a little over $100,000 that the buyer's fee was taken up. And now when we're doing $119. Also, you got to look at that too, on that little over $100,000 in buyer's fee, is that now when we've tapped into that and making sure that the money comes back to the university, and we're using that money to buy new vehicles and make sure that we're buying the vehicles that is actually needed and right sizing our fleet. Now, out of all these vehicles, as you'll see, we have sold, our average age is 2005. And if you just take the 176 items divided by the 860, we're averaging $4,890 per unit, the items that we're selling. And like I said, we've saved that buyer's fee, which is very important to us, because, another $100,000 is a few more vehicles that we can purchase back on campus and turn that back into newer fleet. Now then, where are our buyers coming from? They're coming from all over. So we're not just reaching the Alabama or our local market. We've actually had winning bidders from, as you see, Wisconsin, Tennessee, New Jersey, Mississippi, and Illinois. And then what are some of our success stories? Here recently, just in the last few weeks, actually, we sold a 2009 Ford E50 van. We bought it back then for $15,800. And we actually sold it for $13,850. And it was a difference. It actually, within about 30 minutes, it was at $9,000, and then they got into a bidding war, and they ended up, the winning bidder was $13,850. So if you look at that, the difference is $1,900. So if you just look, what did that vehicle cost us? If you look at that, what did the vehicle cost us over that 12-year period? Basically, it cost us $165 for that particular vehicle. That's one success story. Second one is we had an equestrian team vehicle, a 2017 F450. We paid $71,809 for it, and then we sold it 4 years later, just about a month or so ago, for $68,000. So the difference on it was $3,700, and then our lifetime maintenance cost was $2,981. And so the total difference in the lifetime maintenance is $6,700. So again, our cost for this vehicle is $1,685. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mark with Mercury Associates.
Hey, thanks, Tony. Thanks, Kathy. So before we begin and get any further in, we'll just sort of talk briefly about kind of what we have been predicting and what we thought we saw coming down the pipe, and a lot of folks can relate to it. And then maybe, how COVID has impacted that. One of the things that at Mercury Associates, one of the messages we've been trying to get out to fleet owners and operators is that, to use Paul Loria's words, the perfect storm is coming. And a major facet of that was the very fact that, baby boomers are approaching retirement. Many of them are already retired, and they're getting there at a staggering rate. And I think everyone on this call probably is aware of the statistics that, the following generations, Generation Xers, millennials, et cetera, are not going into the skilled trades at nearly the same pace, with which folks are exiting that. So the ability to identify and retain skilled fleet professionals is only going to continue to grow more challenging. And then COVID hits. And as I'm sure many of you experienced, that seems to have really accelerated the process, right? Retirements accelerated, and a lot of folks, and understandably so, sort of thought to themselves, hey, I'm a year or two from retiring anyway. Do I really want to get back out into the world and risk getting sick, especially earlier on in the pandemic and that sort of a thing? So that is one of many impacts that COVID will had, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So from a vehicle perspective, autonomous vehicles and electric cars, these are things that have been sort of a long time coming. We've been talking about them some time. The autonomous one seems a little further off right now, but we have renewed studies going on. Everyone knows about the big Uber study in Pittsburgh a few years ago. That's back up and running, and I'm here to tell you it's coming. It's more a matter of when and not if. And basically, the holdup is there are basically two very large, lobbying groups. Some have heavy OEM input, and others are on the tech side, so the Googles of the world. And basically, there's been some regulation and law held up in the federal government now for a couple of years about how to classify autonomous vehicles and what to make requirements and standards and so forth. And the big debate is over level 3 and level 4, essentially, which is, do you design a car that says only the computer can drive, or do you design a car or a vehicle where the computer is one of two options to drive, with the traditional driver being the other one? And depending on where you stand, you want to see different parts of that regulation move forward. On the trucking side, this is going to completely change the game. The number one employer or the number one job held by men in this country today is driver, by a lot. And so obviously this will have a dynamic impact on the way the job markets of the future look. We're still a few years away, but you are starting to see this kind of technology being implemented in short distance shuttling around campuses, might be one of them. And we're seeing an increase, over in Europe at this time. Electric cars are interesting. Obviously, they seem to be taking a lead in the world of alternative fuels. Sort of the laughing stock is E85, right? That didn't work out too well. And all kinds of things from biodiesel to compressed natural gas are in use. And I think for the foreseeable future, those kinds of alternative fuels will continue to be viable in certain use cases. CNG, especially in closed circuit, meaning things like sanitation routes and transit, we will continue to see. But there is a lot of crossover with electric, and clearly electric is on the way. So here we just have, there's so many resources out there for you. Here is just a simple one here, and the URL's on the bottom right there. And as you can see, from an operational cost perspective, unsurprisingly, electric vehicles are generally speaking going to give you a decent ROI. What's going to matter, the big input that you have to consider when thinking about how to put that into the fleet is, how much driving you're doing, but also where are you driving. So right now, really the best way to analyze where battery electric vehicles will be a good fit for you is by looking at telematics data. And again, you have to assess not only how much driving is being done, if ROI is important to you, but also where is that driving taking place, so you can identify either charging stations along the way or what infrastructure needs there are. So EVs, they're improving. The technology is going to continue to improve, but it's still a very use case dependent, let's say, project. And it's very important that organizations do not jump in head first and understand, what all is involved with all that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But there's more to it than just fuel, obviously. So, in theory, as everyone has heard, right, the electric vehicles should lead to a major reduction in M&R costs. And in theory, I still think that will probably be the case one day. However, eyes wide open, if you go out and adopt the EVs as a major part of your fleet tomorrow, it will certainly be likely that you will not see a reduction in M&R costs, at least not immediately. And a large part of that is the simple fact that it's very hard to get technicians who have experience and have been trained on that. And so you'll end up outsourcing a lot of it, as well as it's still a dynamic technology that's growing and everyone is still figuring out. And it's still changing, by the way. So one of the big things that's coming down the pipe in the world of EVs is the solid state battery, which, if implemented as production costs come down, are going to eliminate many of the issues that are currently sort of accepted with EVs today, such as range issues, power issues from a towing capacity perspective and things of that nature. And also perhaps most importantly, charge times. Go ahead and click the next slide and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So, you know, from a use case perspective, I'll jump down. You really need to stop and be very thoughtful and be analytical and frankly depend on data as much as you can, as I was saying earlier, about use cases. So for example, we did a project for a university in the Northeast, and they wanted to implement a bunch of small vehicles, utility vehicles like golf, you know, kind of like the golf cart offshoots and stuff that you see. And the thought was whether or not to use electric vehicles or gas vehicles. And in most applications, the electric made plenty of sense. However, one of the things they did was a 24-hour on-campus shuttle. And by doing electric, it essentially necessitated that they double the size of their fleet so as to allow for the appropriate charging time, you know, so that you could have the appropriate amount of vehicles on the road while the others are charging. Whereas obviously if you had a gasoline or some other source, it's a 5-minute thing, right? You add some additional fuel and you keep going. So that's a really important consideration. Also, how much power is needed to move. You know, what you're seeing in large cities where buses are going electric is basically charging along the route. So where the bus stop is, it continues to get charging. But that's a major infrastructure, you know, consideration. So the costs for infrastructure, and more importantly, I think the planning for infrastructure is really, really important consideration for EVs. Certainly your tailpipe emissions are going to be improved, and we'll talk a little bit about other kinds of emissions in a second. But, you know, some things to consider again are those infrastructure costs and also the infrastructure design. You really need to analyze how much battery power are you going to need, both for the portion of the fleet that you're going to turn into an EV today, but also you need a way to anticipate what your future charging needs will be for the batteries on your future assets, right? Right now, we're starting to see hybrids and plug-in hybrids emerge from OEMs for things like half-ton pickups. But really, pure battery electric still isn't out. We've seen a lot of hoopla from several companies talking about a pure battery electric truck, but there's nothing to market, and it keeps getting delayed. Will it come? Yes, absolutely. And on the aftermarket world, you can get BEVs today on all kinds of different kinds of assets. But on the OEM side, it's obviously still growing. So there are ways to look at your utilization patterns for all sorts of your fleet, everything from, you know, class 9s all down, and to anticipate what your future charging needs will be based on what your battery capacity requirements would be in order to do the same work and the same amount of operation that's happening with your fleet today. Obviously, EVs tend to have a bit of a higher acquisition cost. A lot of that is offset via the available grants and rebates and federal incentives. One thing that I think is still to be ironed out, still to be seen, market forces are still acting on resale value, right? Early returns are pretty clear that battery electric vehicles are not retaining their value at the same rate that their, you know, traditional engine, combustion engine vehicles, you know, counterparts are. And yet that does not mean that that's a reason not to buy it, because you have to do, you know, basically total cost of ownership analysis. What does it cost me from these rebates that I get, you know, plus the residual. And one thing that's happening that I think is going to help with residual values as well as other aspects is there's a trend, especially over the last year or so, for OEMs to increase the warranty on the battery significantly longer. So just in the last 6 months, it's kind of become a standard that 8 years is the minimum battery warranty for most BEVs and also PHEVs. Again, we talked a little bit about use cases. A lot of the best electric vehicle use cases are similar to CNG and other fuel types where, you know, it's closed circuit, and what, you know, meaning there's a route. You know, again, think of a sanitation truck or a transit bus or a shuttle bus where you know exactly where you're going to drive and more or less when you're going to drive and how far you're going to drive, et cetera, because that allows you to plan for your charging needs along the way. Open-ended travel is still a little bit more challenging while the charging infrastructure comes into play. But even beyond that point, you know, the charging technology is still developing, as everyone knows. And, you know, if you're doing a 6-hour road trip and you have to stop for 2 hours to charge your vehicle, that's something that needs to be planned out. So a major sort of event horizon on the electric vehicle aspect, if you want to Google it and learn more about it, is really these solid state batteries. Because again, not only do they have more capacity and more power, but their charging times are vastly reduced. And so that will really open up the reasonableness for variant use cases that go beyond, you know, that traditional. Now, for most fleet owners, especially who are NCS, well, I take that back for NCSFA, but for most fleet owners, most of their fleet is sort of on an artificial closed circuit, so to speak. In other words, they operate within a certain region, and that's basically it. Unless you know, you're someone who's in trucking or shipping or something like that. For the most part, you know, that's a usable approach for you. And then, you know, I kind of touched on it, but the last bullet there is fuel time costs. So not fuel costs, which we touched on, but what is the cost of the time associated with the vehicle to charge? Again, that's a factor that should continue to improve. But as of today, if you're looking at implementing EVs today, that's a serious factor. In other words, you have to think through your operations and your logistics and make sure that that's petered out. Okay, next slide. So at this point, you know, there's no doubt that hybrids and plug-in hybrids absolutely can save you money. You know, the fact of the matter is that the acquisition costs on these assets have really, you know, gotten squeezed, so that the additional cost to buy the hybrid or the plug-in hybrid is not huge, and overwhelmingly in fleet applications, if that asset is right for you, it's going to lead to a cost savings. You know, here's an example here on what some of the payback period on this asset is 4.3 years. And I'm willing to bet that the overwhelming majority of the people on the call are keeping their sedans for, you know, over 4 years. There may be some exception for executive cars, but for the most part, very few fleets are turning over their assets or even their sedans, you know, quicker than 4 years. Okay, next slide, please. All right, now let's talk about greenhouse gas emissions. This is something that is sort of near and dear to my heart a little bit, because what's been going on, I think, in the I don't know what the right word is, in the media, in political realms, you know, in marketing realms, is this idea of zero emissions by a certain year. And I think there's some disingenuous commentary about that, really, when we're thinking about it. So yeah, if you sort of you know, if you put your head in the sand about real emissions and you only focus on tailpipe emissions, then absolutely everybody, you know, or at least certain types of assets, you can achieve zero emissions. But I think most people are more than well enough aware that, you know, to charge a vehicle, you're producing electricity, and in producing that electricity, you are absolutely creating additional carbon into the environment. And so, you know, a better way to think about it is by looking not only at your tailpipe emissions, but also what your charging emissions be. And then depending on where you are, both in this country and in the world, it may be in fact the case that EVs are less environmental friendly, or pure battery electric, than, let's say, a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid. And maybe not. It all depends really on how the electricity that you're using to charge that vehicle to be produced is. Now, again, with time, that's going to continue to improve and change, you would imagine. But certainly when thinking about this, if you want to have an eyes wide open perspective and realize what the real impact will be, you know, having an understanding about where you're going to be getting your power from and how that power is going to be produced over the foreseeable future is really very important. Otherwise, you'll end up spending a lot of money and not get the result that you're looking for. So here we have this concept of upstream emissions, right? So there's the tailpipe. Again, nothing's going to beat about battery electric from the tailpipe. But then the question is, when you consider all of the refueling and all of the charging, will the emissions still be better? And again, most of that will be dependent on how the electricity is produced in your area. And really, even this is about as far as we can go today on a consistent and empirical and clear way as far as analyzing emissions. But there has been quite a bit of work done, if you're interested in learning more on the topic and the concept of total life cycle emissions. So the idea is not only the charging and or the fueling, but also in the manufacturing of the vehicle. And obviously there's a price to be paid for lithium ion mining, as well as, for the production of those batteries. And so again, as those kinds of those techniques improve, certainly there's all the reason to believe that, battery electric vehicles will sort of land where we're hoping they will land. But again, we're not there yet. And so, there are some further considerations when making this switch. There's a lot of data available right now to indicate that that plug-in hybrids really are a good, transitional approach, because it allows you to prepare your infrastructure. It allows you to begin to use the pros of the battery electric vehicle. It allows you to mitigate some of the cons. And then again, depending on where you are, if your electric grid is not up to snuff, in other words, if you're still getting a lot of your electricity from coal or other dirtier means, you can implement that so that you're prepared as your grid improves, and then go from there. So again, I think we're getting there. I think that solid state battery is really a major key, but we're not quite there yet. We're not quite as far along as perhaps some of the outlets might have you believe, at least in my opinion. We haven't really talked about hydrogen fuel cell much at all, but that's kind of starting to gain some attention. I think most folks are at least aware basically that, hydrogen is used to generate electricity in the vehicle, and the output is water. The pro of that is it easily replicates the existing infrastructure we have now. The con of that is it's pretty dirty to get the fuel. So if you're looking at the graph we're looking at now, the upstream emissions is a bit dirtier. And so, that technology would have to improve, and also the costliness of it, right? So right now it's still cost prohibitive. If you have anybody on the call who's out in California, which is the only state, really the only area where you see a decent amount of hydrogen fuel stations that could make it feasible for you to really drive one of these around. There are some scattered throughout the country, but I don't know how you could live your life unless you built your own facility, or if you have your own facility. I would love to hear your feedback on hydrogen fuel cell. I'm sort of a fan. I'm sort of an optimistic fan because I kind of like its potential, but on the pragmatic side, I have some concerns about how it would really get implemented. So, okay, next slide, please. All right, motor pools. So you can go right into the next slide. I think a lot of folks are already really beginning to see much of this. Right now, Tony was showing you about keys and key boxes. There will come a point in the future where virtually every motor pool will look a heck of a lot more like Zipcar. For those of you who haven't used it, you have an ID card or maybe an app on your phone, and you gain access to the vehicle that way. And one of the things that I do think we're beginning to see and will continue to see is the way that parking works in that scenario. So at the universities I've been working with, including Tony and others, we're seeing opportunities to strategically park, doing some data analytics to see where are your customers coming from, and also where are the customers you're not attaining, where they're coming from, meaning folks who are using alternative means, POVs, maybe you're on Compass, rideshare, et cetera, where are the hot spots so that you can strategically place vehicles to get those, and also facilitate the return of vehicles in a different way. I do think that will lead to a sense of a white glove service that's coming to motor pools, because let's be honest. I mean, I think what the pandemic has done here is that, in my opinion, it's essentially created a double down on what's important to fleet. Utilization management has always been a key, but now it's really going to get a lot of attention. And what I expect most organizations will find, if they're not already finding over the next year or two, is that they're able to reduce their permanently assigned vehicles. First is they're reducing their motor pool because nobody's traveling. Everybody's doing, web meetings like we're doing today. Then they reduce their permanently assigned vehicles, and then that will lead to a rebound of motor pool assets to a degree because there'll be a greater dependency. I think the other piece that you'll start to see is growing diversity, especially for heavier equipment in motor pools. It's going to grow beyond the typical minivan and the 15-passenger van and the sedan. And I'm sure some of you already see this as well, but instead of maybe just a compact pickup in your fleet, you might start to see 1 tons and 2 tons and things of that nature, because it makes sense to have it as a central rental. And then the big key is, and this is really available today, it's just that, it's reasonable to do today. I just expect to see it more and more because I think, again, the pressure is going to be on fleet managers to do dynamic inventory. And what I mean by that, and I'm sure many of you do this sort of intuitively or experience-based, where you allow your motor pool inventory to, maybe you'll sell off a bunch of assets heading into your slow season, and then make sure your orders are going to arrive in time for your heavy season. Some of you are probably doing that to varying degrees. Essentially, what I'm suggesting is that through empirical data analysis, you can do that in a very real way, in an ongoing automated way, so that you always have the correct inventory that you need, and you're not, basically wasting resources and sunk assets that are not being used. Yeah. So, getting back to sort of the overall thing, I think that what fleet managers are about to experience is sort of their 15 minutes of fame. Because of green initiatives, because of utilization initiatives, because of hurt budgets associated with the pandemic, there's going to be a much greater focus on fleet managers and a much greater pressure to justify their decisions based on data and based on data analytics. And so I think utilization management, while it's always been important, is going to kind of be a double down on that. And fleet managers are going to have to really do a good job with that. And there's going to be okay. So let's talk about shops. All right. Two pieces I really want to talk about is, again, going back to what I said earlier, you have baby boomers retiring, and the other pieces you have is, what is going to be the source of fleet managers? So many fleet managers have kind of followed the traditional path of maybe being a mechanic or something of that nature, working their way up to supervisors and foremen until they become a fleet manager. I think more and more fleet managers are going to be coming from the side of fleet analytics. So, on the one hand, it's harder to find a decent fleet management analytics person. On the other hand, when you think about the industries and the academic fields of study that today's people in the world of work did, again, the data indicates that they're going to be coming from other industries and other trades and being able to apply those same management skills here. But it does mean that there's going to be less of an understanding of the nature of the equipment and the heavy equipment and how to do those repairs. So that, along with the increasing complexity of the vehicles themselves, is I would imagine going to lead to an increased dependency on OEM service stations or other commercial service stations, especially for those of you who are operating very, very small or relatively small shops, because it's going to be harder and harder to achieve the economies of scale that make sense to maintain those shops, because you're going to be outsourcing those assets repairs all the time because you don't have the skills in-house, to get that work done. Conversely, very large maintenance and repair programs are going to essentially double down. I think we'll see a greater investment into analytics and how that can be used to save money on the M&R side. And because of those available resources, you can do things like make sure mechanics are well trained, make sure that they have the certifications they need, participate with OEMs. In other words, get certified by the OEM to do your own warranty work, etc. And I think the big thing, I've been talking about it a couple of years for those of you who've heard me speak at other conferences, the big thing that we're already doing, but is really around the corner, especially for those larger fleets, is dynamic preventative maintenance. And the idea here is that you collect data on virtually every component within the asset, and you're able to integrate data from a multitude of sources, not only your FMIS, but your GPS, but a whole multitude of dispatch records, work order systems, etc., and essentially predict component failure. And in doing so, you'll be able to replace components before they need to get taken off the road and plan for that repair, which is going to lead in turn to a dynamic reduction in downtime, which then in turn should lead to a fairly notable reduction in spare ratio requirements for the fleet. So that's kind of what I think is around the corner on the M&R shop side. I think we have one more slide there. Yep, and then so Q&A, and I'm on time for a change. So there we go.
Great job, Mark and Tony. So I have been monitoring the chat. There's no questions yet. Feel free to put your questions in there and or unmute yourself and ask a question. It's a quiet day. Everybody might get 15 minutes back. Okay. Well, since there are no questions at this time, I think, Lauren, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you if you have any announcements.
Thank you, Kathy. We do. We have our next seminar or our webinar is going to be with NASPO Value Point. It's on July 13th from 3 to 4 p.m. Registration is now live. I'm going to put the link in the chat box. And we will have another webinar, member-led webinar in June, and topic on diversity and inclusion. And we'll have more information on that shortly. Other than that, thank you all for participating. We really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Same to you, Lauren. Thank you.